Looking for my video, make sure I can see all you guys. Oh, and hit the screen share right from the beginning now. So we have a slideshow to watch. And how's everybody doing? Anybody want to open up for any questions, what you'd like to see get out of our negotiating class today, or anything else that you picked up from previous classes, sessions? Getting some good stuff. Are you able to apply anything that you've picked up from some of the other sessions yet?
I have something to say that I think will put a smile on your face, Roya.
All right, what is that about the smiley face?
So a potential seller wants me to send her, my presentation or whatever you want to call it. But she said to hold off because she's having a family crisis. Her brother's in the hospital. This is not a friend, someone I just met at the nail salon. And so I sent her flowers with a note to her house saying, I'm sorry, da, 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 da. And she thanked me and thought that was very sweet and thoughtful. That was awesome. My note, a little customized note. There you go.
Yep. No, that's awesome. And so one thing that I'll just kind of tag on that, you guys, is that once you create some systems in your business to really look at the process from the time you get a call, if you're using Yellow for Seller, right? In Roya's example, if I have this form and I get all the information that I need, and that's part of my system, it just frees my mind up from having it on a piece of paper somewhere on my desk that I got to dig around and find it. Where did I take those notes? Blah, blah, blah. And it allows you that more and more systems that you put into place, it allows you to be in the moment, to be able to go, I probably should send some flowers, because that's not in a system. You don't know when that stuff's going to happen. And it just calms everything down in your head with all the things that are going on in there now that you're supposed to be doing, need to be doing. Oh my gosh, got this contract. If you guys got a listing today, what would your life look like for the next day or two? Do you have a system, like from the time somebody says yes, what do I need to do to get the house on the market as fast as possible and not miss anything? So those are the kind of things that you want to start thinking about in your business as you're doing your first, second, third deal, or your next few deals, documenting everything that you're doing so you can have not just necessarily a checklist. You can take it beyond just a checklist, but that when that happens, you can knock it out as soon as possible and then be present when things are happening around you. Because that relationship right there, those flowers sent and the call to thank, it's a done deal. I mean, when that person does anything with real estate, they're probably going to do it with Roya. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
As we were fighting about the notes, I'm like, I'm going to pick and choose my audience for those, but I just thought I should share that with you because I thought you would be like, oh, there you go. There's a note.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's awesome. Anybody else able to put anything into place, or you're seeing start to show up that it's like, oh, I think we covered that in an Ignite class and now you're getting to use it or re-experience it? All right, so again, today we're going to be talking about negotiating tactics, and until you're actually in contract situations, and I'm going to challenge you too, that if you just have some crazy thought of a situation where you might, like if I'm talking about a negotiating tactic and a situation pops up that you think of, like, what if this happens? Throw that out there too, because the more we can attach this to real world experiences that you either experienced or you think you're going to experience, we can attach that to that and it's going to stick better, right? So like anything, hopefully you guys are printing the manuals out ahead of time, and you're kind of skimming through them a little bit, so that when you're skimming through and you're seeing certain things, that you're writing down what questions you might have about that. Before we go into the material, it'd be great to go through and go, so what do they mean by, or when would you use this? And that's going to be in our material. We have the course, then you skim through your notes again with the material, and then you go back and watch the video again. If you do those 4 things, and I know it's like we're having this session every 2 days, it's a commitment, but that's the best way to make this stuff stick. also coming to it again and again and again. So we'll be restarting this again in March. So you can come to it again and just stay plugged into it. Okay, so any questions before we get going or anything else to add?
No, good.
Yes, we have a question.
No, I'm saying it's good. No, this is a topic that I really want to learn, so I'm really excited about it.
Awesome. I'm glad you're excited because this is the funnest part about real estate, actually. And when you get good at negotiating, so there is a kind of a little preference that I'll put with this too. Before, in an earlier session, we talked about mastering somebody's why and knowing the purpose behind why they're doing it and why that's important and all that other stuff. If you can keep that why in check when you're going into negotiations, the other thing you're going to hear me talk about as we're negotiating today is you might be representing a buyer or you might be representing a seller. When it comes to negotiations, you're negotiating for both. It is not you and the buyer against the other agent and the seller, or you and the seller against the other agent and the buyer. It's not you against them. I mean, our whole Keller Williams philosophy is win-win or no deal. But what I want you guys to take away from this session today is you have your client and you have the other person that can prevent your client from getting the goal that they want, which is buying the house. If you're representing a buyer, that seller can say no to anything you try to negotiate, and they're not going to get the house. So we fail. So really, you're negotiating both parties, whether the other agent plays along properly or not, whether the other agent is a jerk or not, whether the other agent is nice or not. It doesn't really matter. Your job is to negotiate so that both parties get what they're wanting, or one party thinks they're getting what they're wanting and you're getting your client what they want, and or even compromising with your client to make sure they get it. And a lot of times all these negotiations come back to just explaining to your client what the options are, what the other side's willing to do, and how do you, what are you willing to give up? If you really got a controversial inspection notice going and the seller's just not going to do anything, your conversation with your buyer is, here's the situation. They're not going to do this. I've tried everything to get them to do it. If they didn't do it, is that something you can live with? Or do we just need to cancel the contract? Right. And if it's a snap, well, forget that jerk, just cancel the contract. It's like, are you sure that's what you want to do? I thought you liked the house and I thought having the new home by this date was important to you. So you're trying to get them to take the emotion out of it for a second, those snap decisions. And I'm kind of referencing controversial negotiations, right? We're not just talking about battling back and forth. We're talking about ways to set these offers up as well and make them go your way and go smooth. But in that particular instance, it's like getting them to calm down and get out of the emotions for a minute. And sometimes it's like, you know what, why don't you just talk about it tonight, what that situation is, decide if this is really something that you want to pass on, or, if we should think of something else. And sometimes you got to let them do it overnight and calm down, and they call you back the next day and go, yeah, we were probably just napping a little bit. All right, let me pause that. Somebody might have an open mic for a question. No? Okay. All right, let's go into some of this stuff and pull up some actual negotiating things. So actually, I hope, did that resonate? I mean, did you guys get what I'm saying here? Is that your job is to put the deal together, and at that particular time, I think I have this in my notes, but I'll cover it now, is that when you're representing the buyer, you're negotiating for the buyer. But once it goes over to the other side and it comes back to you, you're now working, you're presenting it in a light from their perspective that's going to benefit your client, to get the client to say, yes, I'm okay with that, and move forward. So that's kind of, you're switching your hats from buyer to seller all the time. And it doesn't matter if you're representing the other side or not, the seller, for example. You got to present the counter offer, just like when you make an offer and they counter back. You've got to present that counter offer from your non-client to your client that this is a pretty good deal. And you're not convincing them it's a good deal. You're explaining how it matches up with their why so that they move forward with it. And if it doesn't match up with their why, they'll cancel the contract. Does that make sense? Any questions around any of that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So I don't know where you are, where a majority of your class is from, but for us, I'm in Bergen County. And for us, the lawyers, we have to have lawyers involved. So I know majority of the time it's important to know who your lawyers are, and so that they work with you, not really against you, and keep you out of the negotiation process. So
Yeah.
as an agent, how can I give value in negotiating with the seller for my buyer, or vice versa, when lawyers are already involved doing the negotiation? Do I just check in with the lawyer to see what's going on? I could make it go along?
Probably. Attorneys are definitely not going to be paying attention to their why. But again, so you bring up a really good point. So when I'm talking to the attorney, they need to understand that any information I'm sharing with them is not to convince the client, the buyer, to do something that they don't want to do, but it is to explain to the attorney so they understand the big picture and the why and the goal of the client. And maybe it is even something along the lines of, and again, it's going to depend on how well the attorney will even work with you, is, I'm here to help them help both parties sell those. I know that you might even say this exactly. I know the seller wants to sell, and I know the buyer wants to buy, and I know we've got a gap in between, and you're doing a lot of that part of it. But there's any way I can offer assistance to that to help keep the deal together. Or if it starts to get really detailed or messy or something, and I can offer any assistance at all, you might even ask them, if you're talking to them for the first time, how does that look in the way you handle the real estate transaction? Do you want me to be involved, or do you not do it with any assistance at all? And even asking, I know the client may call me on some things too, and I need to know how to handle that conversation to match what you're saying. I just want to make sure that I'm complimenting what you're doing, and we're all working together as a team to get this deal done. Not a typical call that a typical attorney is going to care about. I mean, because a lot of attorneys have the ego, and it's their way or the highway, and it's not always that bad, but you know what I'm saying is, like, they are attorneys. So you just need to, sometimes if I don't know and I know I need to be involved, I'm just going to flat out ask, how do I stay involved with this transaction and help during the negotiations? And they're either going to tell me, you don't, I do my job and you do your job. And it's like, okay, I know where I stand. I'm not going to go back to my client and go, yeah, your attorney's a jerk, you won't even let me help. You're just going to say, if you guys have any questions about anything through the process, let me know. You are still representing them. But again, I don't know the laws well enough to say you're completely representing them. It could be transferred over to the attorney at that point. I'm not sure. And that I would check with your leadership in your market center to know for sure how you handle that. If you get a specific situation with an attorney, I would always go to my leadership and ask them how you should be handling. Your broker would know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So because and I mean, it really does bring up a good point here as we're negotiating all this stuff. I mean, you guys need to tell me where you're completely out of the picture, and we need to talk about a different negotiating part of the contract, so that we're talking about stuff you can actually use. And just remember, though, we are not attorneys. Like, don't ever you don't even want to be an attorney. When you're talking about representation and having people sign buyer agency agreements and all that stuff, you do realize that if you don't get a buyer agency signed, it's the best legal umbrella you have for yourself, because once the contract is signed, you have legal liabilities to that client based in that contract, that if you don't perform those, you could be legally in a courtroom defending yourself. So the less less legal liability you have, the better for us. If they want to buy a house without us and don't want us to represent them, you don't need to talk them into representation. That's just giving you more responsibility and more legal liability. However, with that said, this is going to sound contradictory, but you also want to get them in a buyer agency so that they don't buy a house with somebody else. They buy it with you for that legal responsibility. I just want you to understand the difference there, that we are not attorneys. Like, we don't go in and change contract terms and somebody says, I want this paragraph out. We can't do that. The attorneys have to do that. That's the legal side of the contract. But well, this already gets into some negotiating tactics, is to then say, what is it about that paragraph that you're concerned about, and try to understand what's happening there, because they may just be misinterpreting something and making a big deal out of nothing. So what is it about that paragraph that you don't want in there? What are you trying to help me understand so I can best help you? Of course, that's if I'm representing them as a buyer. So yeah, you do bring up, I'm glad you brought that up on the front side, because I did mean to ask that on the front side, because there are some states that do have attorneys involved. We do not here. No attorneys are involved at all where I live in Kansas City. All right, anything else on that? Because that was a great point to make.
You mentioned, and this is just quick, you brought this up only because you brought it up. You said the buyer, if there's flip side to having the contract with the buyer and not. But if they still, you show the buyer the house, whatever it is, and then they'll go and buy the house from a different agent. I guess it depends on the state legally. Like, then I could go after that agent and be like, hey, I was showing this house, even though I don't have a contract, right?
Yeah, well, it depends on the state, and it depends on your documentation. I mean, there obviously could be procuring cause and some other stuff.
Okay.
But if it's at all gray and it wasn't clear and they weren't given that right, I mean, you just got to have documentation of everything and how they're responding to things if you're going to do that. Yeah. So, and actually bring up another great point, because there's a fine line between using that as a learning experience to make sure I do it the right way next time, versus the energy it may take to go that route and just to collect some part of the commission. You could go sell another house, especially if you had a master list and your phone calls ringing. Your phone's ringing all the time, right? Sometimes you'll just use those as a learning experience. However, somebody does something shady, then again, you're talking with your broker and explaining the situation the best way you can to figure out if there is something to do there, for sure. Great question. All right, so just as we're getting into just negotiating contracts, the breakdown of the common points of negotiation. And if you're following along in your book, I think we're on page 4. Well, actually, I'm looking at a instructor's guide, so mine might be different pages. The one thing I will tell you, whenever you're like going through a buyer consultation, one of the things that buyers want from their agent is how to negotiate the contract and get the terms and stuff accepted. So when you're meeting with somebody for the first time, you can say, something along the lines of, agents are not created equal. They do not teach negotiating skills in real estate school. That's something that I say a lot. The benefit of working with me is I have, or if it's you guys and you're newer, we have some of the top agents in the area that have been selling real estate for years. My team has got years and years of experience behind me. And you want somebody representing you that knows how to handle those situations. And if there's ever a situation that comes up, because real estate's different all the time, I know who to go to get the real answers and how to make that work for you. But in real estate school, I mean, most real estate agents do not have anyone behind them to help them. They don't have go-to people behind them for situations, and they don't teach negotiating skills in real estate school. Do you guys remember them teaching negotiating tactics in real estate school? I don't even think the word negotiation really even comes up in real estate school, does it? Or in your state, did it?
No, they do it at my office. They teach all the time,
at the
every day.
office, which again, you're showing your value proposition. If you go back to our value proposition session, one of your value propositions is the company that you're hanging your flag with, right? That company teaches negotiating. They don't teach negotiating to most agents. Most agents go into an office, they don't have training, right? They teach marketing, they teach all this stuff and share all that stuff so that we have the best way to help you win more often. And that is a value proposition, is the fact that you're at Keller Williams and just all the tools that are available. So here's just talking about negotiating contracts. You got the buyer to the buyer's agent to the seller, or seller's agent to the seller. There's this chain of command that I don't know if y'all played a game when you were either like learning leadership skills, or I think they did it in grade school or something, where they had everybody stand around in a circle. Hold on one second here. I'm gonna cough, and I don't want to cough in your ear. been talking all day long, so the vocal cords are getting a little raw. But where you stood in a circle and somebody whispered a secret to the person and it goes around the circle, and by the time it gets back to the person next to you, if you started it, they're telling you something totally different than what you told the person. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Have you played that game before? Yeah. So just understand that now we're negotiating, $500,000 homes and stuff, or $250,000 homes, and you're going from the buyer, what the buyer wants, to you, to the agent, to the seller. So one of the things to keep in mind with all negotiating tactics, and this is just Brad Korn sharing with you real world experience, is say to the other agent what you would want to say to their client to get them to agree to it or whatever. Give the agent the words to go to their client. Meaning, like if you have an inspection notice with 7 items on it, you don't just scan it, send it over and go, hey, the inspection notice was sent over. I mean, if you really want all 7 items fixed, you could call the agent and say, hey, I've got an inspection notice coming over. We've got a few items on the list, but a couple of them that I was wondering about might be bigger, or I just wanted to run through them with you real quick and see if any of that sounds like a concern with your client. And then if they said something like, yeah, putting in a new furnace is not going to go over well with my client. So then we can start having a conversation of maybe layering in what would the benefit be of a seller putting in a new HVAC unit and doing it for my buyer to make this deal work. And just to kind of make this real for a minute, I'm going to open it up. If what would be the benefit to the seller putting in a new AC unit when they don't want to put it in to make this deal work and do that for my buyer? Because I want to get that done for my buyer. Is anybody want to take a stab at what you might say there, or are you totally stumped on how that would be a benefit to the seller if they don't want to do that?
I don't know. It feels like very unrealistic in this market, like, where buyers are waiving inspections, only limiting to structural and mechanical. I'm like, how can you even negotiate that?
Yeah. Yeah. So
I feel like, I don't know. I feel like being a buyer's agent in this market, it's like, I almost feel like you don't have any power.
Yeah. Well, so, and the thing to keep in mind at this particular point is you've already won the offer. So now we can renegotiate a little bit. However, you have to also be careful and make sure there's no backup offers. Now we're going to walk through this whole scenario, okay? Because this is going to be, yeah, go ahead.
That's my thing. Sorry.
Yeah, no, to her point, I did have a situation with a buyer under inspection, and it was the whole foundation was crumbling. This house. Yeah. I can't tell them to walk away, right? But I treat my buyers like they're my friends, like family. But I know I also have my own ethics that I cannot say. How would you handle a situation like that when the buyer has no intentions of renovating, like re-gutting the house or tear down? They want to buy it, but it's got a foundation issues and it's expensive. It's going to cost them this amount of money. I mean, they don't know how much it's going to cost them. How do I help them in that part of the negotiation aspect?
Yep.
Not tell them to make a decision, but guide the right kind of guide within my guidelines. How's that?
Yep. So both of these situations, whether I'm saying foundation or whether I'm saying HVAC or anything, this is how we're going to talk about this situation right here. So let me just talk the bullet points and then we'll walk through actually negotiating that deal. And I'll replace HVAC and foundation simultaneously, but it's going to be the same process. So how can your ability to negotiate affect the outcome of the deal? What are some of the ways that you can negotiate in your everyday life? What are the skills that great negotiators possess? And why is asking questions important? So we're going to actually do all of those when we walk through this process. So buyer does the inspection. It's got major foundation repairs. Now, first of all, we've won the bid. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the inspections. Is that part true for your market? You're not doing the inspections until they've won the bid, right?
Correct.
So the thing is, like, one of my buyers, like, they won the offer, and since they were waiving inspections, we have a 3-day attorney review period. So I wanted to just make sure that, they do the inspection and cost them like, $320, but it's just to make sure that there are no like big, and it's like a small condo, it's not like a big old house or anything, it's in a condo situation. So I kind of advise them to do that inspection just so that if there was anything red flag, they still had that a 20-day review period to back out of it if they wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. So in these,
So I mean, that's what I recommended, but I don't know.
yeah. So so starting with the buyer, if we get the bid accepted, depending on how many people were fighting over it, how many multiple offers there could be
Right.
cash deals, there could be as is deals, all that stuff. So again, our terms are going to have to win. And your conversation with the buyer on that front end, if you followed some of the tips that we've been sharing throughout Ignite, like contacting the agent before you showed it to say, what's your traffic been like? How many offers do you have? When you're writing the offer, we just talked about this one in the last week, is calling the agent going, I'm working to get these people to make a decision on your listing. I would like to work with you, and I'd like to see them, decide on a house. This would be one that I'd like to see them get. So how many offers do you have? Because at that point, I'm making the decision, like they're already deciding they want to write the offer, but I'm calling to say, how many
Right,
offers do you have? I'm trying to get them to decide on this one. So now if I know there's 7 or 8 offers, then I'm going to ask, is there anything you can share with me to help me make sure my offer is one of the strongest offers, which really you're saying, how do I make it the best offer, right? So again, then you're coming back to your buyer. So now a couple things are going to happen here. Listen, there's 11 offers on this. As far as I can tell, I think there's a cash offer as is. So inspections are very important. However, if you do put an inspection in your offer, you need to understand that one term might make an as is or a cash offer look better. So we need to really talk about, obviously, you could even say right here, just be yourself and go, I've always encouraged buyers to do inspections so that you can cancel if you want to. Just know though, that if we put that in there, based on what I think I know about the other offers, we might not win this one. Because then it's their decision. It's like they are important. In fact, even if you write it, if you decided that you would write it as is and it didn't appear that there was anything major, we can still have an inspection done after the fact so that if there is anything you need to work on and fix. You just won't be able to change your mind at that point on buying or not buying. And the difference there is, in this particular instance, there's multiple offers and people are writing them as is, so you might have to give that up. Now, I'm not saying that's 100%. It all depends on the situation, and you got to talk to the agent and find out. Like, so we submitted one where we do get to do the inspections and cancel it, but the other buyer was as is, but getting conventional financing, and our buyer was cash, and we had just do the inspection and be able to cancel. And their offer was higher, but ours was cash. So we weren't even the best offer, and we had those terms in there, but we were cash versus conventional, and it had escalation clauses, so the price was going up. So they're not going to be able to get that. Well, they could be concerned about the appraisal now, where with the cash buyer, it's not going to be an issue. Now, again, representing my buyer knows they don't care what the appraisal would say or not. They need a house to live in and they want that house. So I know that from that conversation. But again, we got it picked where we actually had the right to do the inspection and did do one, even though they had an as is offer that wasn't cash. Does that make sense?
But aren't you able, regardless of what kind of offer you're submitting, that in an inspection, you still, as a buyer, that's a time for you to be able to pull out. It doesn't matter what kind of offer it was. You can still pull out at any time.
Well, if you had a
based
cash
on the
as is,
inspection report.
if you're up against a cash as is buyer that doesn't care and is not doing any inspections, then those terms just got better than yours. Your buyer may not win the offer.
No, correct. I thought you said you had a buyer but they were wanting to do the inspection as long as but then the other person didn't have cash and they were doing as is, or did I get that wrong? Sorry.
No, the other one was financing, but they were doing as is to make their offer more attractive, but we were more attractive as cash.
Got it. Okay.
So they took ours with the inspection, just said, can you do your inspection really quick? Because we got another offer that's actually better, but your escalation clause matches their, well, actually their escalation clause even went 10,000 higher. But the fact that you're cash, meaning I can tell you what happened on their end, is a listing agent's like, I don't know if we're going to get this appraised at the 10,000 higher price, let alone maybe this price. You see what I'm saying? So they took our offer with the inspection clause in there that we could do the inspections and cancel, but they got the other one sitting there as a backup. So in fact, she
Got
just
it.
called today and said, hey, we got that backup offer. Can you send over that inspection notice? I'm like, the inspection's good. She's accepting it as is, but it was her out to get out of it if something major showed up. Does that make sense? And not to make this too
Yes.
confusing, because every little scenario and every situation is going to come up. So the point here is coming back to this foundation and the inspection and finding the HVAC or finding that there's foundation repairs. So the buyer's going to do the inspection. The buyer's agent gets the result of the inspection report. The foundation's bad or the AC's bad. And at this point, we are already that winning offer because we're in place to do the inspections and got to that point. So now what you're telling the seller's agent, going back to how I started this conversation, how can I sell to this seller who has multiple offers maybe behind it or maybe not, doesn't matter in this situation for what I'm explaining, that them fixing the AC and or the foundation is in their best interest to do that. Now, if they've got a cash offer accepting the property as is, then I still got to try and convince them that this is an issue and if we can get it fixed. And you'll watch this where I've got the buyer's hat on right now as I'm walking through this scenario. And then I'm going to put the seller's hat back on while I'm representing the buyer and how I bring it back to the buyer. Does everybody follow me on that? So I'm representing the buyer this whole time and I've got my buyer hat on. So I got the inspection report and there's some foundation issues or there's AC or furnace. So I got to tell the seller's agent what I need them to relay to the seller, that it is in their best interest to fix this, right? And whether I put this in a formal writing or not, I might not be at this point yet, because once my buyer signs an inspection or a resolution form, whatever you guys use to say, we want these items fixed, you've now opened up the door for the seller to just cancel the contract, move on another contract. And again, there might be more terms than that. Like in ours, we have 5 days to renegotiate once we ask for something. And if the seller doesn't respond for 5 days, and I don't know if you guys tell me if this is different in your state, but if they don't respond in 5 days, either party can cancel the contract. So if they're not responding, we're coming up on the 5 days, I need to relay back to my buyer that we're coming up on the 5 days. I've not heard that the agent's ghosting me. Oh, you wouldn't tell your client that, but the agent's ghosting you, right? Not returning your calls. I've not heard back from the agent. On the 5th day, they can cancel. Because my buyer could say, well, then that's not an issue. We want the house and we can resubmit our resolution without that item to be fixed. And we're taking the house as is. And as long as we do that per the contract, based on the renegotiation period, we could still move forward and be locked in that contract. But we might have to give up something like a foundation repair. So I'm going to come back to the foundation repair or HVAC, because those are like two major things. When I'm talking to the seller's agent, I'm going to say, hey, there's some major foundation issues going on there. It's going to cost quite a bit to get it fixed. And the one thing that I just wanted to find out is how do you think your seller is going to take that? Because that is something that my buyer may want to ask for. And I'm kind of leaving this a little loose if I'm talking on the phone first. I want to feel them out for that. Well, I mean, if they said we got other cash offers waiting to buy it as is, I might say, are they up at the same price we are, or are they kind of like lowball investors? Because the only thing I have here is that to get the price that we're at and with some financing, I mean, the seller is going to probably need to do something with this to sell it to anybody if this deal doesn't go through. That's the angle I'm going to play at first, is like when a foundation repair pops up, there's not too many buyers that want to buy a house that's falling down. So that's going to be something that's going to affect every future sale if they don't have people lined up waiting, right? That's going to affect the next buyer too, who's getting any type of financing. And then I'm going to say exactly what I want them to say to their seller and say, even if you get a cash offer, you know how most of the cash buyers are in this market. Now I'm just giving them the words I want them to say. You know, most cash buyers are going to want to discount the property because they're cash and they would buy it as is. So are they going to discount it more than what it would cost to address this issue, come to a conclusion that makes both buyer and seller happy, and we get something fixed and done here, and they get their house sold, they get to move to wherever they're going, and my buyer gets to move in and buy the house from them and raise their family there. So that's a negotiating tactic that I'm showing them the benefit of them fixing this repair versus just willy-nilly either not asking or sending it over and just seeing what they say. I'm giving them the conversation to have. That, and most of the time the agent will be like, yeah, let me talk to him and see, you know, blah, blah, blah. Now, if there's a cash offer buying it as is and it's really close to our price, they're going to tell me, well, we got a cash offer. So I'm actually even finding out information that we're not supposed to always know what the other terms are, but they'll tell us inside conversations, they'll give you pieces of it. So now that one goes to the seller and they're going to decide to do whatever they're not going to do, the way I just explained it at first. So it's going to come back to the seller's agent. So if they said they're not going to fix it, they would take that chance. Then I need to go back to the buyer and say, you know, the seller's just not willing to do it. They'd rather keep the house or wait for another buyer. So how bad do you want this house? Right? That's one tactic. The other tactic is, depending on what we can do, well, I better not go there. I mean, there's lots of different ways that you might be able to fix some stuff into a price, getting repairs done. Is the appraisal value going to be more if the foundation were repaired? Could you change the price? There's a whole bunch of things in there that you probably should talk to your broker about before you do any of those. But I have increased the price by some repairs, had the repairs done right before closing. So the seller's paying for them, but they got paid at closing out of proceeds. So there's a lot of ways to put the deal together. You just got to make sure you're doing it legally and the way you're supposed to do it. But let's go through another one where that comes through there, comes to the seller. I tell them what they want to say, and the agent comes back and says, you know, we really do have a cash offer that's buying the property as is, and they wouldn't have to do any repairs. So now I need to go back to the buyer and say, you know, there is competing bids. We have another offer. How bad do you want this house? Could you get this fixed? Is it anything? I mean, we might be on the phone with the foundation repair company again in the foundation issue to really say, is this something that needs to be done immediately? Or is it something that's not really moving right now that you want to secure later? We already got the cost, and just maybe talking to the buyer about how they would work that in. Because they could go back and do a refinance on the property in 6 months or a year, and get money out to put back into the house and do some of those repairs. So I'm just laying those options out, that there are other ways that you might be able to do this to come up with that money to put back into the house and fix it now. So then they get to decide if they want to move forward or not. Same thing with the HVAC. I mean, that just literally came up on my daughter's house. She just closed, what was it, on the 11th? No, she just closed last week, and the AC and furnace were completely shot. We were able to negotiate in our terms before we had everything in writing that the seller would replace that, but our price reflected that because the appraisal came in higher, and we went back to the lender and said, is it okay if we put this price in there? And he says, as long as it's under the appraisal, I'm good with it. And so as long as we met the terms of that, we got her a new AC, new furnace, everything in the property, and her payment changed like $4 or $5 a month. So there's lots of different ways to negotiate that. But she was already at the point that if it doesn't work out and there's not enough appraisal in there, I'll just save up some money and I'll put in a new furnace and AC myself, which she would have done that over the next 6 months to a year, but she wanted the house. So that was her decision. I just was able to get it covered at closing so she didn't have to. So you just got to know, you really are asking questions and giving information and hearing the response and not being tied to it, just always making the best decision and giving your clients the most information you can. So let me pause there and just see if you guys have any questions about any of that stuff. All right. Was that I mean, was that good information just to kind of hear that process and walking through it?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so now we're on page 5 in, make sure I did cover everything I wanted to cover on that. Yep. Just remember, the buyer wants to buy and the seller wants to sell. Our job is to get all the information by asking all the questions and giving them all the information they need. Okay, so on this slide, it's on page 5 in your participant guide, if you got your guide in front of you. And on this one, we're just talking about common points of negotiating typically fall into the 2 categories. It's either pricing or terms. Terms is pretty big. There's a lot of terms that could be in there, but there's closing costs, closing date, conveyances, meaning what they're leaving with the house, what all that stuff, earnest money, an option fee, repairs, all of that stuff is in that the terms part. Price, again, you're trying to figure out, like I was just having a conversation with somebody today that's like the buyers just keep getting beat out. You know, they go 5,000 over and they lost to 10,000. They go 10,000 over and they lose to 20. Well, the next offer needs to be 20 over. Eventually, you're going to get to a point where you might be 40 over asking price because you lost out to a 20 and the next one that came in was 30. So your next one's 30 and you lose out to 40. Once you go to 40, you might be the next top one. And again, explaining to your buyer that there is an appraisal, if they're getting financing, there's an appraisal that if this is not in line, that appraisal will come back. Now, I know a lot of people throw in there, well, what about removing these appraisal contingencies? Again, you just have to explain that properly and make sure that your client completely understands what that means. If you want this house bad enough and it appraises $20,000 short, do you have $20,000 to cover the difference? Because that's what you might have to do. So they would have to know that was okay before you submitted the offer with removing the contingencies. Now stop there for a second, because in those particular situations, you're going to have to be on the phone with the listing agent and try to get as much information as you can. If your market's really doing that, man, you are on the phone with every one of those agents going, what's your traffic been like? Do you have offers in hand? What's it going to take to even be in the running for that, or to be the best offer? Well, to be the best offer, and whatever they tell you at that point, you don't worry about whether or not they can tell you that or should tell you that. If they tell you that, they tell you that. If you're representing your client and they give you information, then you represent your client. You can tell them everything you are legally allowed to tell them by representing them. It's not about, hey, you can't tell me I know you can't tell me the price. If they do tell you the price, then that's part of negotiating, is getting them to tell you as much as they can. So like when I said before, if you really want to know terms of a contract and you didn't win one, you could go back to the agent and say, what is it? What can we be on backup position? So like you can submit your offer as a backup offer. If they counter that backup offer in a counter, you pretty much know what the first offer is. And then you get to go back to your client and say, well, here's the deal. I did get us in backup position, an offer to be a backup offer, but that price is 20,000 higher than where we were. Oh yeah, no, we don't want the house for that. At least we can decide. Or they can decide, yeah, I knew we probably should have gone more. That's more than we wanted to go. Well, do you want to be in a backup on this? Yeah, I think we really do like the house. Now, as a backup offer, we're still going to be looking for other houses until anything new that hits the market. We would cancel our backup position if something better came along. But again, we know now what the terms of the first offer were. And that actually makes you look good, because then you can tell them why they didn't get the offer and it wasn't anything that you did. But it's basically going to come down to either price or terms. On closing costs, when you're representing the seller, I explain to the seller, if I'm working for the seller and an offer comes in and the buyers ask for closing costs, and I know all these situations, we got to cover them, because in a normal market, that's pretty common. Did you guys have closing costs in your offers all the time before this crazy market? Did you see them in offers, or do you never see them in offers for your market? Do buyers ask for closing costs, or do you know? Yeah, okay. Now, in a hot market with multiple offers, you're taking that out. But in a normal market, I saw a couple people nod their head. Yes, that's not uncommon to see closing costs, $5,000 closing costs paid for by seller, right? So when you're negotiating with your seller, remember, you want to get them to accept the offer and get the property sold and get them moved on. I would run a net sheet and I'd know what their net's going to be. And if that net is the number that they were looking for, and I've got closing cost in an offer, if I just send it over to my seller, I say, all right, so they're offering you $350,000. They put $1,000 earnest money down or whatever it was, and they've got $5,000 in closing costs. And the seller's like, oh, we're not paying their closing costs. You know, why would we do that? They need to have their own money, blah, 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 right? So that is where the negotiating that's going to come in on my part, representing the seller, is to explain, really, closing costs is not you writing a check out of your personal checkbook paying for their closing costs. All right. Really, what's happened here in this $350,000 offer is they're asking for $5,000 in closing costs. So they're offering you $345,000. But that's a negotiating tactic to get your seller to get out of the emotional state of freaking out about paying somebody's costs. They should have their own money. It's really not what we're doing. They're offering you $345,000, but the offer says $350,000 with the $5,000 closing costs. Let me stop right there. Isn't that the same thing? Isn't that basically the same thing? It's a $345,000 offer, or it's $350,000 with $5,000 in closing costs. Do you guys see that's the same thing, or it's not the same thing?
Same thing, but I'm confused. I thought that, you know, buyer has closing costs when they're buying the house.
Yeah, buyer does have closing costs when they buy the house, and the lenders have a conversation with them on their side that says, oh, and you can get the seller to pay a certain amount of those closing costs. So even out of that $5,000 that I'm using as an example, the buyer's still probably showing up with $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to close on a $250,000, $350,000 house, right? As you go up in price, there's going to be more closing costs and everything, and more down payment and all that other stuff. So that's another negotiating thing, to having that conversation to say, oh no, the buyer still has to come up with money. They have to come up with more than $5,000. Now, unless they're like VA or something, right? That's zero down. That one's irrelevant. But in this particular case, they're still coming with money. The thing is that most buyers don't have 20 grand sitting in the bank to buy their first house. So the lender allows some of this cost to go towards their down payment and closing costs, or their closing costs. There's certain things that they'll allow to be written into the contract, and that's all that's happening here. So they're basically offering you $345,000 and asking for $5,000 in closing costs. So when my seller, now they can still decide, well, that's going to be $5,000 shorter than what I want to net at the end of the day. And if that's the case, then we're going to counter the price to $355,000 and leave the $5,000 closing cost in there. They may say, well, counter, take the $5,000 closing cost out and leave it at $350,000. So in a negotiating side, knowing the buyer's side, the fact that they ask for closing costs, one of two things: either I'm calling the buyer's agent, go, hey, tell me the deal on this $5,000 closing cost. How critical is this? Now, I will tell you that that is already on the front side. When an offer comes in, I am giving the agent either an email, text, and phone call, or usually all three. Say, hey, I received your offer. I always let them know I've got their offer, right? Got your offer. Now I'm looking through the terms, and I haven't met with my seller yet, but I saw that you had $5,000 closing cost in here. And the price is, you know, at asking price, and they ask for whatever the other concessions might be. So I'll kind of summarize what I saw. Say, I'm going to take this to my seller, and I'm going to do my best to get this offer accepted. Did you just hear me? I'm working for the seller, and I'm talking to the buyer's agent. I'm going to do my best to get them to accept this offer. So if there's anything you can provide me to make the best pitch on this offer, I need all that, the pre-approval letter, some of that other stuff, right? But if for some reason these numbers don't match out and they're going to do something different or counter offer, what's important on here? Is it the $5,000 closing cost? Is it the closing date? Is it the price? Help me out here. Now, do you see how if you are a buyer's agent and you're working with me as a listing agent, I've kind of realistically, I've put you in a weird position. because you're about ready to spill the beans and tell me everything about your client in the way I just handled that question. Now, I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but if you're really good, you know that you're now getting information. Well, the closing cost is the most important thing. You know, they saved up a little bit of money. What you just told me is the purchase price isn't the big deal. And so same with the closing date, you know. So I know that we could probably raise the price $10,000, leave your $5,000 closing cost in, and make my client $5,000 more. Maybe, you know, again, I'm negotiating and I don't know what's going to happen on both sides of the party, but by you saying the $5,000 closing cost is the most important part, you just said that the price wasn't. So it doesn't mean that they're automatically going to take it, but that's how you get negotiating. That's how you get information so you can negotiate the deal. Now, let me just stick with that one. So I come back and my client is like, so the closing cost is important to them. I know this net's a little less than you wanted. So I would suggest that we leave the closing cost in. We'll raise the price $10,000 and leave that $5,000 in there, and we'll get you $5,000 more. And that would make your net this. And the client's like, yeah, I could live with that. So now I come back to you, the buyer's agent, and I say, hey, I've got some great news. So the seller was okay with leaving the closing cost in there. This is negotiating tips. This is how I'm negotiating. I'm going to sell you the benefit on why the price is higher and it's a benefit for your client. So I'm going to say the good news is we got the closing cost in there. I kept that in there. Now they did change the price a little bit, but really your payment for your buyer is probably going to change about, and let's just say it's at 4%. We raised it $10,000. So it's going to change about 40 bucks. That's easy math. It's just stupid easy math. So the good news is your buyer's not going to have to come up with $5,000 extra to close. The price changed a little bit, but it's really only going to change their payment like 40 bucks a month. See how I just laid that out there? And so I'm telling you what I want you to tell your client so that they'll take our counter offer and sign it and be done. Now, if they can't do $40 more a month, if they were already maxed out and all that stuff, we're probably not going to put the deal together. Or the second round might be, you know, can they get gifted the money for closing? We can always take the $5,000 out and drop the price $5,000 if the price is important. So those are just, it's getting all the information and then relaying back what you want the other side to say to the client to get them to take the offer, because I need to get the house sold for my client. And those are the terms that they want. That's the best terms I could get out of them. So does that make sense? Anybody have any questions coming up on any of that stuff? I mean, we're talking some pretty high level stuff here. Is this good stuff? Is it giving you a way different, more deeper look on negotiating tactics and down to the nitty gritty on what you're kind of paying attention to?
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome.
Definitely, yes.
Cool. Good. That's what I want you guys to get. All right. So now we'll talk about the 3P approach to negotiating. We got just a little bit under 5-6 minutes to go here. The 3P approach. Negotiating is a skill that can be learned and perfected with experience. So learning to have these conversations back and forth and feel out each party and ask questions and all that stuff. You'll learn that as you go through more and more offers. And the best practice for negotiating and bringing the buyer and seller together is the 3P approach. So, and this really lines up with everything that we were just talking about before. It's preparing. So you need to know what your goal is, what your client's goal is, thinking ahead on how things would play out, setting clear expectations, being informed. You do have to obey the laws. And if you're not sure on that, you talk to your broker and know the documents inside and out. Actually, this one I'm going to hit on real quick. Contracts change about every single year. And I learned, I won't say the hard way, but I had a wake up call one day when my business partner and wife back, from 20 years ago, contracts had changed enough. And she heard me going through some of the contracts with the buyer. And she just said to me, have you ever read that paragraph? And I was like, well, yeah, I read the paragraph. Like, how long ago did you read that paragraph? I was like, well, I haven't really sat down and read the paragraphs in a long time, but the title's the same and it looks the same. And I read that and I was like, oh, yeah, it's changed a little bit since then with new representation and some other stuff. So, man, you might want to sit down like every 6 months or every year, and especially when you're newer, actually read through a contract, highlight in yellow anything you don't understand, and ask your leadership or anybody, what does this line mean, just so you know. Because I still go through and I paraphrase contracts, but now I at least read through them and know that my paraphrasing is still pretty correct, right? So definitely know that stuff up front. Also on preparing and learning, ask open-ended questions. So the best way is say WOPEN, like what, when, why is that important? You know, what will you do if this contract, if we counter this and they don't take it, what's your plan? Are we just going to go out and look for another house, or are you going to regret not getting this house? So there's a lot of open-ended questions will help you find out more information versus closed-ended questions that are just basically yes or no. So a lot of times when I'm talking to the other agent, I'm asking questions like, what's important about, you know, the closing date or the terms that are in there or whatever, so that I know what I have to negotiate with. But what additional information should I know? What is important about the closing date? These are the questions that I'm already sharing with all you guys, just because I've done this for too many years, right? Do you have to sell your home by a specific date? Yes or no? That's going to be a closed-end question. You know, if your house doesn't sell, if we don't get this deal put together over that one little item, especially if they were throwing a fit, like if it's a seller and they just kind of got pissed about closing costs and blah, blah, blah. So if we don't get this deal put together because of the closing costs and they really need it, are you okay with just buying your house back? Right? I mean, if they say, yeah, I won't sell my house if I have to pay their closing costs, then now I got to go back to the other side and convince them why the closing cost isn't that important. We'll lower the price. It'll drop your payment down. I'll figure out a way to sell that back to them, that they're not going to get the closing costs. But again, I've done everything I can for my client. And if they're like, no, I'm not paying any other closing costs, even whether it makes sense or not, after I've explained the different things along the way, like I did earlier, and he's still just stuck on that. And usually that's going to be like an elderly couple that back in the 60s, I had to earn my way. I had my own money for everything. I didn't ask people for money. I mean, I'll work my way through that as best I can and help them understand that they're still accomplishing what they want to accomplish, that this really isn't paying their closing costs. It's all figured into the price of the house, blah, 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 blah. And if he just comes from that era, believe me, I've had him. And there's nothing you can do about it. Then you've explained all you can explain, and that's his final decision. If the house doesn't sell, it's not your fault. I mean, he's just got to be okay with keeping the house. And, you know, again, we might not get another buyer for another month or 2 or 6 months. Are you okay with staying in the house longer? Right? Is that worth $5,000? So anyway, just finding out as much as you can. We've already gone over so much of what would happen if, why is this important to you? I feel like, I mean, if you're seeing something on here that I didn't clearly cover in those negotiating things that we had, please like raise your hand or pause me out and ask. But then the prepare and do. Ask questions to clarify and set clear expectations. I wanted to take you through all those examples so that you could see the slides and how they match up with everything, right? We're not going to read this scenario on page 9, but if you read it and you have questions about it, let me know. Circle, underline the key areas where you think you would need more information and send it to me in an email and say, here's where I would want some more information. And what are the 3 specific questions you would ask your client? Guys, this is homework right here. If you want to take that page out of your book, page 9, and complete that exercise and highlight and scan it or take a picture of it with your phone and send it to me, I'll review it with you, right? And we'll talk about the ahas that you get from doing that. So do that and send it to me, and I will be more than happy to go through it. Or grab the names and numbers of some of the people on here, figure out where they are in the office and call them and ask them if they don't mind going through some of the negotiating tips from this book. Again, that's why we're doing the 1 hour is to get the content, and then you guys take out and do some of these exercises. But we already covered this, presenting. You know, you're basically just paying attention to how they're responding to things. Being quiet is one of the best things you can do in just about every situation. Is just after you say something, just pause and let them be the next one to respond. Listen carefully to what's important to the other party. So you might be reacting too quickly in a lot of situations, or been thinking about what to say so much that you're not even paying attention to what they're responding with, to pick up on just little things. Kind of related, if you're not a poker player, you won't understand this, but in the game of poker, you don't know what everybody's cards are that are laying on the table, but you can hear them say stuff to other people about something that might tell you what was in there. An example might be they went to make a bet and they were like, oh, I didn't mean to bet that much. Well, that means that their card wasn't as strong as they thought it was. So just always really pay attention to everything that they're saying back to you, and making a mental note of that, and strategizing on what your next plan of action will be based on that information. Stay calm and relaxed. Don't ever get like worked up and bent out of shape. I mean, I have literally been on calls where the agent starts getting all ticked off and kind of getting, elevated heart rate and voice and everything. And it's just where I come back to at the very beginning of this session. I said, listen, we're here to help the buyer and the seller get the property sold. All we need to do is figure out the best way to make this a win-win for both of them, so that your clients can get to where they want to go when they need to get there. So let's kind of work through this and see if we can figure out a solution. And that just kind of calms everything down. But again, focusing on your customers' needs and giving them the best chance to get that offer accepted, that it's the best thing that they've got. Again, asking those what and how questions, on closing dates, what's important to them, all that stuff. All right. Another one, there's another on page 12 is to go through the different strategies. So again, there's like page 9, page 12, and then there's one other one that if you guys do those and send them to me, I'll go over them with you, right? So analyze counter tactics. That's the other one. With a partner, read the tactic, brainstorm on your counterattack tactic. So if you guys do get together and do any of this stuff, send them to me. Or if you just want to do it with me, if you want to go through that page, call me. We'll get a time scheduled and we'll walk through that page with you. And that's on page 13 in your guide. So you got some things that you can really play along with some of these things. So again, they talk about the different types of things: hot potato, good guy, bad guy, nibbling, all these different tactics that are in there. What I've shared with you, it could be all of these things are mixed in there. It's not important that you remember today which one was the hot potato tactic and which one was a good guy, bad guy tactic. It's about using that information and putting your hat on from your buyer and your seller to get the deal put together. So again, they show you all these cool tactics. That's not stuff you're going to like really jump out there and go, okay, this one requires the hot potato tactic. That's why I don't really spend a whole lot of time on that when I go through this. So just make sure I didn't skip something on that. Oh yeah, we're just real playing some of these things on the 3 Ps. Recap and create your success list. So that's what you guys get out of today. If we're recapping some of the things that we talked about, what's some of the key items that you think you're taking away about negotiating from this session?
Communication with the listing agent.
You nailed it. Absolutely, communicating. And just remember, it might be you the only one that's really paying attention to how that communication is happening. They might be reacting. Or a lot of times, guys, if you're newer, the agent hasn't even talked to their client yet, and they haven't talked to their client. So that's where you need to pay attention to that. And when you're getting a dead end and they haven't talked to their client yet to even know, say, well, could we do this? Can you at least review this with your client and get back to me and let me know? I already know what my client's going to decide. That's perfectly fine. But I have actually had offers accepted before because I said, will you just share the net sheet with your client? I know you're not looking at offers until Sunday and today's Friday. Said, but will you at least just review the net sheet with your seller? Because my buyers might have another house that they're going to write an offer on tomorrow. They're buying the next perfect house that hits the market. But if you can review the net sheet for them with them and just see if that number works for them, that agent has called me back and said, no, they're going to take it. And I'm like, they are? I mean, on my side, I'm like, holy crap, we're beating out. Everybody was waiting until Sunday to get their offers presented. We put one expiring on Friday with a nice little explanation. Hey, I know this isn't what you were expecting. However, my clients have missed out on a couple properties and they're buying the next one they see. They would really like to make this one work. So if, you know, this one does expire tonight, and they would have waited till Sunday if they had to, but I threw that in there and then I talked to the agent and just said, if you'll just send them the net sheet and review the numbers, and you know, if they don't work, they don't work, or if they're willing to wait and risk that amount to see what they might get on Sunday. I mean, and it was like 15,000 over asking price. The property would have gone for 30 over, but I don't think the agent knew that. And they're already going to see 10,000 to 15,000 more than they thought they were going to get, which is why I said, just review the net sheet with them and, you know, let me know. And they took it. So that's one way to beat out multiple offer situations. All right. Anything else before we end? Was this good? Was this good stuff?
Very good stuff.
Okay.
High level.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want you to feel like you got cheated out of anything there at the end. Honestly, this hot potato thing and good guy, bad guy, we went through a lot of those tactics that if you go through the book and you have questions about any of those specifically, we've covered them all in the examples that I gave you guys.
And that's exactly the one thing that I love the most, that you provide us with real life examples. And it's just so easy once you put it into that perspective. It's just so easy to follow along, because when you're just reading and reiterating whatever's in a textbook, it's one thing. But when you try and put it into real life and convert that into like, okay, something that happens day to day, it's really hard for me, at least for me. I don't know for anyone else. So I really appreciate your examples.
Yes, and I appreciate you sharing that too. Oh, I'm just getting to the thing. All right, anyone else? I think somebody else was going to jump in and say something. Here's your survey to fill out. If you click the link there, it'll open up another tab so you can fill that survey in real quick, and even put your comments and stuff in there. By the way, we get those as well. So any comments that you want to make or ahas, you can put in there as well.
What's your market center? I keep putting in for Lee because I forgot to ask.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think you could just put your market center, because
okay.
I'm working with you guys. Yeah,
Okay.
you can just put your market center in that spot.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
mine is, I actually am an agent in one market center and helping out kind of like a TL kind of position, helping out the agents in another market center. So, but yeah, you can just put your own market center on there. All right, guys, great session. Hope you got some good stuff out of it, and can't wait to hear you share when you're using it, when you get to actually see it show up in real life. Let me know and share that with me in a text.
Will do. Thank you so much. Good
All right.
afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very practical. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm.